Everyone has been talking about the big PlayStation showcase today, but I've had my eyes on more important things, specifically the Bloodlines 2 extended gameplay trailer. We've been waiting with bated breath for such a long time. Ever since the Chinese room were announced as the new developer, it's just been that waiting game of, alright, you've talked about it, you've shown us some cinematic trailers, but we want to see the main event. We want to see the gameplay, we want to see what we're going to be getting into, and now the day has come. I will say that the Chinese room have not done themselves any favors in the lead up. I think if they just said basically nothing, they'd show nothing since the initial announcement they were going to be the new developer on Bloodlines 2, because remember, it has gone through development hell. It started with the Hardsuit Labs dev, Brian Mitsoda was there, and then it eventually got cancelled. It got moved over to these guys. Now, if they had just said nothing since that announcement that they were making it, and then they'd shown this gameplay trailer, I think there might have been a slightly better reception, but they stacked their own cards against themselves, because everything that they've shown and talked about leading up to this moment, it's all been crap. It's made the game look bad. Fire, the main protagonist, basically looks like the average female Twitter user who has pronouns in their bio. That's all we get. It's not really the vampire power fantasy that we imagine, especially if we're fans of Bloodlines 1. That wasn't doing it for anyone. The 15-second gameplay snippets, they were stupid. They were meant to show off the clans, but they just made the Chinese room look like clowns. They looked incompetent. It's like, if you've got 10 seconds to show, is this all you've actually worked on? Is there only 10 seconds of in-game footage that you can couple together? What's going on? Why can't you show any real footage? Now, I will say, before I get into my real thoughts about the showcase, what they have shown, it is slightly better than what I was expecting. I thought they could have nothing. That was the worst case scenario, that they basically had nothing, and what we'd seen in the gameplay snippets was basically it. That's all they'd really worked on. So I was really curious. But they do have some gameplay. They've got a working combat system, it seems like. So I'll give them props for that. They could have had absolutely dead nothing, but they have something. So that has exceeded my expectations to some degree. So props to them for that. And I'm going to try and be nuanced here, because you're going to get all my real thoughts, but I'm going to give you the positives first, and then we are going to move to the negatives. There are, as you could have possibly guessed, there are plenty of negatives, but I'll say this about the positives. If this game was nothing to do with Bloodlines, let's say it's still a Vampire the Masquerade product, but it's got nothing to do with Bloodlines, it's not the sequel to a beloved game. If I'd been shown this just out of the blue, I hadn't been anticipating it, and I saw the footage of the showcase, I would have thought, yeah, it's okay. It's not something that I'm going to really hate. It's probably not something I'm going to be too interested in. I'm probably just going to forget about it. It's not the worst thing I've ever seen. Now, keep in mind, that doesn't mean I'm praising it, because it is a sequel to Bloodlines, so we have to talk about that. So don't take that as, oh, I love this, it's all good. We will get to it. But the second positive is they do have a working combat system. I thought they might have only had those combat animations you would have seen maybe in the clan reveals, and that was literally it. They do seem to have a working combat system, so it's there. And if we do think about the original Bloodlines, was the combat the strongest aspect of the game? I don't think so. People didn't love it for the combat. It was the characters, the world, the hubs, the explorations, the immersion, the tone. All of that was incredibly special. The combat, not so much. It was why the last third of the game is kind of panned even by hardcore fans, because it's basically a big combat romp. No one really thinks that's its strong suit. So the combat in Bloodlines 2 isn't a lot worse than the combat in Bloodlines 1. I don't really think so. This game seems to have a functioning combat system. And I guess if we're going to give another positive, maybe the graphics are okay. They're serviceable. I'm not really a big graphics person. I don't care. People who are a lot more into it can probably see some issues, but I think it's alright. It wouldn't turn me off if the game was really good. That's all out of the way. That for me is basically the positives. Now we have to get to the negatives, because there are many of those. And the first one is when the gameplay footage starts. It is a 30-minute video, and we'll take a look at some of this together, but we won't watch the full 30 minutes. We're going to look at a shorter 2.5-minute trailer. So we'll have a look at some of that and go through it. But when the 30-minute extended showcase started, they talk again about this being an RPG. And there's always been that inkling, that concern, that these devs don't really care about the original Bloodlines. They just want to make a game in the Vampire the Masquerade universe. And the Bloodlines name is just kind of there to maybe bring in more fans. It's always kind of odd because the original didn't sell that well. It's got a cult following, you could say, but it was not some huge sales juggernaut. So make of that what you will. But they're absolutely coasting off the original Bloodlines name. That is definitely the case. Despite them saying it's an RPG, this looks incredibly dumbed down. If you're a fan of the original, it seems to have very little that is going to get you excited. Now again, I said the combat looks serviceable, but no one is coming to this is looking forward to a Bloodline sequel and focusing on combat. If you had got everything else right, awesome characters, a great world, maybe those hubs, maybe that tone of the original, just an all-around great thing, and you had decent combat, that is fine. No one wants the combat to be bad, make it alright, but you need to focus on the rest. They very clearly have not done that. Whatever they're doing, it does not feel like Bloodlines at all. Hardsuit Labs, for all the issues, I don't know what sort of game they had in a playable state. It might have been nothing. But the trailers they showed, it was much more like the original Bloodlines. It had a bit of a tone. It felt like they were making an effort to please fans of the original. And I don't buy this crap where it's like, oh, the devs are doing their own thing. They shouldn't be held back by the standards that fans have for the original Bloodlines. If you're going to try and sell it to fans of the original, and that's how you plan to make your money, damn right that you should be held to some sort of standard by those fans. Bloodlines 2, it deserves to be compared to the original. This has nothing going for it when compared to the original classic. It's quite interesting because when people are trying to look at this game and think about what does this remind them of? What sort of feeling do they get? What sort of game is this? Most people aren't saying Bloodlines 1. They're saying things like Dishonored. I see Dishonored thrown around a lot, that this game reminds them of that, because the combat style, for instance, just the whole focus, it seems like more of Dishonored to people. I will say this, I can see some of that resemblance, but if you think this game is going to be anywhere near as good as Dishonored, you're having a laugh. It's not going to happen. Now, even if that's wrong, it somehow ends up being similar to Dishonored somehow in some sort of quality. That's not what we were sold on. This was meant to be a sequel to the original Bloodlines. Such a unique RPG. There's been very little like it since, in that tone, in that sort of style. We're certainly not getting that. If it somehow ends up being something like Dishonored, I can tell you this. The level design is part of what makes Dishonored great, and from what I've seen here, there's very little of that. One of my very big concerns, and I sort of mentioned it earlier, was the idea that they're showing these 15-second clan snippets, and maybe they just don't have that much content put together. This barely resembles a game at this point. I don't really know if this showcase really put those fears to bed, because it's basically just one little section that repeats over and over. Again, we're going to watch this in a second, but the whole intro section that you go through in this reveal, it lasts a few minutes, but then something happens that takes you back to the start of the section, and you're basically just going through the same level again, like 3 or 4 different times. So there's like one interior that they show you here, nothing else. When I think of Bloodlines, I'm thinking about walking around the city, walking around different hubs, meeting different people, going through that experience. Do they actually have that? Because we haven't seen any of it. I've actually got concerns, and I'm not sure if they've said somewhere that this isn't the case, if they've confirmed there's hubs or something. I would not be surprised if this is just like a linear game where you just go through missions. Now, I know the original Bloodlines kind of has those missions in that way. You do go on quests like that, and you go to different story environments, different set pieces. But the hubs were fantastic. It's some of my favorite part of the game, and I think it is essential for an RPG like this. If it's literally just going through linear levels, And this kind of feels like a walking simulator with some combat moments. It's not going to resemble Bloodlines at all. And then you've got the dumbed down RPG systems. There's very little of it. And we'll now just have a look at how this kind of plays out. Again, this is the shortest snippet of the showcase. You can see a 30-minute extended one, but let's have a look.
I do not like this.
All those marked freaks were waiting outside.
And yet none appear to have entered.
How does anyone find anything in a mess?
Now, within moments, there's, for me, a red flag, a pet peeve, is we'd already heard about this, where Fire, who is a predetermined character, by the way, so you can't create your own character. You can give her an outfit, fantastic. Apparently there'll be a girl Fire and a guy Fire. We haven't seen this mythical guy. I don't know where he is, if he exists, or if they're just saying that and they're going to cancel all that at the last minute. But supposedly you can choose your gender. But aside from that, predetermined character, and you have this other person, Fabian, who's kind of stuck in your head. It's like a Mr. Robot situation. Well, not really, that's a bad example, but Fabian is a character stuck inside your head. And he just keeps talking to you. How are you supposed to get immersed in your RPG when A, you've got this predetermined character, which is just not really how the original Bloodlines was. People like to raise, oh, Bloodlines 1 didn't have a great character creator, it wasn't absolutely limitless like some games are, but I don't think that was on purpose. I think they ran out of time. They couldn't do as much as they wanted on the character creator. So I think it's stupid to kind of use that as the reference point. It absolutely would have had more options if they had the time. So it wasn't a philosophy thing. Whereas with Bloodlines 2, it absolutely is. The main point of the game is that you're stuck as Fire, and you're stuck with Fabian as well, who's like a Navi from Ocarina of Time or something, who just keeps yapping at you. But I think in a game like this, it's much worse, because you can't really get immersed in the setting and trying to play your own way in a role-playing game, and nothing I've seen suggests that this is adding to the game in any way. It seems like Fabian's there to treat you like an idiot, basically. You might not know what's going on with the story, what you're seeing in front of you, so Fabian's got to explain it. It's condescending, it feels patronizing, it's just not good.
It's like this.
Perhaps to him this is an orderly chaos. Nosferatu trade in secrets. This is merely another way to hide them.
Now, in this 2-minute condensed gameplay trailer, they've had to kind of skip ahead a little bit. In the 30-minute version, it's basically just walking along like a walking simulator for minutes at a time, and absolutely nothing's happening. There doesn't really seem to be that much exploration either. Maybe they just didn't show it, but it seemed odd just that the first impression was just walking, doing nothing for 2 or 3 minutes in not the most exciting environment. Obviously, for this little 2.5-minute snippet, they've skipped ahead, but it says something about the quality of what they showed off in the full trailer when it's uninterrupted. So a lot of it feels a little bit amateurish. So they've jumped straight into the combat here. That's not the case with the full intro that it looks like. There's a bit more talking, and we'll see some of that in a second, but you can obviously see throwing projectables. You've got your health bar and things like that, so it looks like it's going to get into the combat. You can see there as well, so you hold the triggers on your controller to feed, and the gameplay director describes in the interview that they do, oh, it's so immersive because it's line of like 2 fangs when you press on the triggers. It's 2 fangs going into your enemy. Well, I'm going to be playing on PC, so that's not going to work on me. I'm going to probably press the mouse button, whatever the button is. I don't think that's going to apply to me. So you can just tell it's been designed for console first. Everything about it, hey, that's been the case for a long time where a lot of games are console focused, but maybe not so much in the last year or two. I'd expect that in 2017, but coming into 2024, Baldur's Gate 3, it is a PC game, it plays well on console, sure, but it's been designed for PC, and that feels just a little bit of a shame. I hate when the whole interface and absolutely everything is for a controller, when you know that the audience is going to be, for a lot of people, it's going to be PC. And here we go, we got the charge. Oh! And it's fine, like, nothing here is bad. We got a bit of this. There's a lot of fighting that they show you in the full gameplay trailer. It's 80% fighting in like one conversation. With one character that you talk to anyway. Oh, fisticuffs. That goes on in the full one, the 30-minute plus, and then you sort of get this talking time with Willem. Now, again, the gameplay itself, the combat, it's not bad, but that's really all it seems like that you're doing outside of having some pretty average conversations, which you'll see in a second. That is not Bloodlines. If it was a random game, not Bloodlines 2, again, I'd say, yeah, sure, I wouldn't be hating on it that much, but you are making the sequel to a beloved RPG, and it just looks like shite when you look at it from that perspective. It just has nothing going for it. The combat could be serviceable. Is it a strength when compared to other games? I wouldn't think so. This game's not going to have the biggest budget in the world. The only thing that they seem to be trying to appeal to people with is basically just general fans of Vampire the Masquerade who don't really give a shit about Bloodlines. And I've seen plenty of those people. They seem to be sort of salty that there's fans of the Bloodlines CRPG that like these styles of games. They want a computer role-playing game. And they're like, oh, you're just being entitled because you want it to be not like the old game you remember. Maybe the devs want to do their own thing. Fuck the devs. If they're not going to deliver a proper sequel, I won't be buying this. And they deserve all of the criticism that they get. The gameplay trailers I've seen, about 30% likes, the rest dislikes, 70% dislikes. So I don't think that this has helped them at all. Sure, they've got a bit more than I thought they could have in a worst case scenario. Again, worst case scenario is they had basically nothing and this was going to be a hard suit lab situation all over again. It's probably not going to be that. I think the devs somewhat knew their limits. They knew they weren't going to be able to make an in-depth RPG, and we've basically got like a walking simulator with combat sections, but probably linear levels. So they've talked about, I think, sometimes in interviews that there's side quests and different things. But again, until I see that, I'm not sure, because even this gameplay showcase, perfect opportunity to basically settle the doubts, show people that they're wrong, if they're making claims that they don't have it all together. They had a chance to prove that wrong. I don't think this really did that. All this basically tells us is, hey, you guys were wrong because we're capable of putting out a functioning game that works and you can play it, but are we capable of handling the Bloodlines IP? Absolutely not. So they're not really proving anyone wrong with what we have seen. It's not really going to get anyone more excited, and anyone who was already looking at this project negatively, they're probably not going to be convinced, because again, all they really show is combat as well as this conversation that we'll look at now. And I have a suspicion that this isn't going to redeem it for anyone.
Finish the song. How cruel.
Am I interrupting?
I burst out laughing when I watched this all live. So he turns around and I was just immediately brought back to Oblivion. It just had the vibe of the Oblivion NPC. I'm not sure if he's meant to be scary or something when he turns around, but it was kind of laughable, and it's where I just sort of thought, this game, it obviously doesn't have the biggest budget, as I said. I think it's going to very likely be a scaled-down game. There's not going to be a whole lot to it. The game is probably going to release this year, given the studio knows their limits, but I mean, look at this. Does this get you excited? Does it bring you back to the original Bloodlines? No, I mean, some of it looks like a little bit of a joke.
It's you. The Nomad.
Got another point. You look at Fire, when you go back to those combat sections, and you're smashing things, you're doing all of that stuff, and then you see who you're actually playing as. Because you're in first person before, and you're sort of imagining someone cool, then you see who you're actually playing as. It doesn't kind of correlate, the person who's been smashing everything up, and then you look at who's doing it. That doesn't fit, that's not quite right. And again, this is the problem. Even though the original Bloodlines, it didn't have the most in-depth character creator, because it was in first person from memory pretty much all the time, maybe outside of a couple of cutscenes, you kind of could just put yourself in their shoes. And so it was okay. You could believably be the person who's smashing everything up, being a badass. But Fire, it's not believable. I don't believe this person is doing all of this crap. I can't really get into it. I'm not getting into her shoes. It's ridiculous.
No. All I had to do was keep my head down for just a few more nights.
He's hiding something.
Now we've got the dialogue choices. Wow, and even these are like designed for console essentially, where it's like we'll only have 3, at most it looks like 4 options at a time, because that's what's on the D-pad. Yeah, thanks for that. So we can't have any more in depth, because it could be the end of the world if someone has to scroll down. That'd probably be their excuse for having lacking dialogue choices. But you just look at the options that are here. None of these suggest to me that you're going to be changing the direction of the story in any meaningful way. I just have a feeling, and this is just a real modern game design thing with RPGs, where the people working on them, they are often failed writers in other mediums, like they wanted to be a film writer or a book writer, and they move into games because maybe there's availability. And some of them, it seems obvious, they see role-playing games as just getting in the way of the story that they're trying to tell. They want to tell a linear story, beginning, middle, and end, and then they're stuck having to, you've got to offer players choices, those toxic gamers, So it just ends up being, no matter what choice you make, in Telltale fashion, those games, it doesn't affect the story at all. I'm not expecting anything massive here. Maybe there'll be a couple of different endings, but I don't think you can really take it in different directions. They've got a chance to prove us wrong with that, but looking at the dialogue choices, they've dumbed this down much further than anything Hardsuit Labs were doing. That seemed much better. So this is just sad to see, really.
I guess that makes it easier.
Makes what easier?
What happens next? Now I have to do what he told me.
Yeah, the thing is, really scary. Oh, Willem, you're so frightening. I just don't really care about whatever story they're telling here. I just think what it is everything in lead up to hearing this narrative. By the time you reach this point, you're just already kind of bummed out. Everything you've seen here, it feels nothing really like the original Bloodlines. Most of the systems are missing. It's clearly not a role-playing game first and foremost, where they're prioritizing playing your own way. They just want to do their own thing. They obviously don't care about the original Bloodlines. Maybe they'll say that they do, but they're clearly not sticking to that from a design perspective. It's not as if they've gone in some other direction where they've tried to innovate. No, I mean, if anything, they're removing stuff, and they're just trying to make a totally different style of game. People, when they're trying to be positive, some of them use that Dishonored line. I've said before, it's not going to happen. It's not going to be like that. You've seen some of the level. If you watch the whole showcase, you can see it. These are not Dishonored levels. If it has some melee combat that looks like it, fine. But you're not going to get that sort of an experience. It's not an immersive sim. Come on. And I'll show you something from the full trailer, which is when you pick up an item. So this is kind of the menu UI, it seems like. And if we look at this, it actually reveals much more than you might think, because sure, we can see here that you're just picking up some document, who really cares, but we can see up the top here the different options in the menu. So we've got the codex. Key items sit within the codex, which essentially also tells us there is no inventory in this game, not really. You're not going to be able to pick up weapons, armor, or anything like that, it seems like. You're essentially just going to have what you start with as well as your abilities. And that is based on the 4 clans. They've talked about that. There's kind of a stealthy one. You've got the more brawler combat one. You can see the outfits tab, but they've pretty much revealed in the past that outfits are purely cosmetic, and you can just kind of collect them. I mean, let's be real. There's going to be some microtransactions on the store somewhere to sell more outfits. That's probably the main motivation by even having this tab. They said something like you can collect the outfits for the various clans, no matter which clan you pick, but that's about it. And then you've got the ability tree. So there's probably going to be some sort of skill tree. And if you watch some of the gameplay trailers closer, you can see when you kill enemies, you feast on them, that you do get XP from those kills. So that obviously will mean there's the leveling system, and you can then pick skill points. And there's probably going to be 4 ability trees, I'd imagine, maybe 1 for each clan, and maybe you can go in a few slightly sub-directions. But this, again, it's just all pretty much disappointment. Outside of just having workable, serviceable combat, I don't think anything else has been shown that creates any sort of enthusiasm, generates any sort of excitement. It's all a bore. Everything in here, it just suggests they don't want to make a proper sequel to Bloodlines. And it's hard to know how to react from here. I mean, am I angry? Not really, because leading up to this is about all I expected. If anything, it exceeded expectations because I thought they could have absolutely nothing. There's a lot to suggest that because of how they've marketed things poorly. They've got such a bad marketing team. Those 10, 15-second trailers, I've never seen anything that bad before. It was embarrassing. It's laughable. Whoever decided that should be ashamed of themselves, really, and their job, because it's just so poor. I'm not sure what they were trying to do. They clearly had a bit more. They could have shown snippets of this or something. Do they have any other levels? Probably not at this stage. Maybe that's part of the reason. This whole intro section is all they had to show this particular time. They've talked about going forward, they're going to show more of the clan abilities. But again, that's the big problem. It's all about showing the combat at this stage. Nothing about the characters, nothing about the narrative. Is Willem, who we keep seeing, the Nosferatu, is that the only other character in this game? Are we just going to keep chasing him around and having these conversations? Because he keeps popping up in the extended showcase. You keep bumping into him and having chats to him. And that's really all it is. So it's hard to be angry, but at the same time, am I disappointed? I guess so, but I've been disappointed for a long time. I think everyone sort of knew the writing was on the wall as soon as Brian Mitsoda got fired and the whole Hardsuit Labs drama happened. The only positive is it sort of prepared us for this. We knew this was not going to be good. It isn't good. I don't think I've been hyperbolic in sort of saying if this had nothing to do with Bloodlines, I just simply wouldn't care. It'd be apathy. Whether I see this because it's Vampire the Masquerade related, I might have gone, yeah, whatever, and just moved on. But because it has the Bloodlines name, you feel like you've got to at least follow it from beginning to end. You've got to see this journey, what's going to happen with it. And I'm expecting disaster. It might not be the worst game of the year, but I think when you compare it to the game that it is a sequel to, it can't just be anything but a total disappointment. So from here, I might see what fans are saying. Most people seem to be sharing the same thoughts. It's disappointing. All of the things they're focused on are not really in line with what Bloodlines should be, the spirit of the original. So I think it's all we really expected. I see it as a failure, given what they sold us on, what they promised. You might get some copers who try and say, oh, that's way too harsh. Look at how it played. It was okay. If you want to think that, that's fine. But I have high standards because of the original Bloodlines. So thanks so much for listening. I'll see you on the next one. Cheers. Bye.